So, one of my posts on Facebook has hit a nerve with some folks. It was a post about not correcting someone's grammar or spelling, especially if their meaning is clear, because grammar rules are used to silently perpetuate inequality and marginalization. And I don't actually want to get that deep into any of the language stuff in this video. Check out that post and read the comments therein if you want to hear more about that. But what I want to talk about is the kind of reaction a lot of folks had to being told not to correct someone's grammar or spelling. Some of these folks were really quite personally offended at the suggestion that they weren't doing a public service by correcting every language mistake they come across. And this is an interesting phenomenon about how various systems silently perpetuate themselves. Not all kids have equal access to school. Not all schools have equal access to materials. Not all kids had parents who had reliable, non traumatizing access to school. Not all kids learn and internalize the same grammar rules. But in the US, there is an elitism about using what's known as standard American English. This is the dialect you're probably most familiar with. It's the one you were almost certainly shamed for misusing as a child in the US. That's the thing. These invisible systems leverage shame against the folks who uphold them. You were teased, shamed, ridiculed, given bad grades over any deviation from standard American English, even if your meaning was perfectly clear. The can I go versus may I go debate is a very common example of this, even if it is somewhat outdated now. Most kids who grew up in the early 90s or before experienced the unsettling feeling of asking, can I go to the bathroom or something, and being met with a teacher's smug, superior grin saying, I don't know, can you? Until you repeated your question in the proper format. This is not a teaching tool, as it does nothing to demonstrate why those words should be used differently. But it is a shaming tool, which ensures that you'll use the right format, even without knowing why, which leads you to shaming others for having the audacity of using the wrong one. Except in some dialects, it is the right one. So some kids go home and experience conditioned shame while listening to their relatives speaking in their own dialect, because without knowing how or why, speakers of standard American English learn to assert dominance of this singular dialect over all others. They learn to shame and deride speakers who deviate from this norm, as they were shamed in their formative years for any deviations. Unlearning silent systems like this that you've grown up immersed in is very hard. It feels incredibly uncomfortable. Recognize that discomfort for what it is. Your brain has a conditioned response to feel shame at these errors and pride at making corrections. The visceral reaction to being told to just ignore them is real, and I think that it's important to acknowledge that that discomfort exists, and you will have to experience it to some degree in order to unlearn what has been forced upon you. But anything that's been learned can be unlearned, and as you unlearn it, the conditioned discomfort you feel at seeing deviations will start to go away. The first and most basic thing you can do is start to recognize how your reactions to certain things aren't based on a solid foundation of logic, but on conditioned feelings that have been ingrained in you as a child growing up in a world that militantly polices all deviations from any decided upon norm.